It's nice and quiet here. There's no one in the garden. There's no one knocking on the door. There's no dogs barking. There's no children too loud in there. Let's see how long that lasts for.
All right. A really warm welcome, everybody. We're really pleased that you were able to join us for today's webinar, which is called Is Putting on a Brave Face the Right Way to Lead Through the COVID-19 Crisis? Lou, if you can move me on. My name is Christina Taylor. I am an OT consultant and owner of my own business. I'm also the chair of the Lead Network Education Committee, and I'm the moderator for today's session. If you can move me on. Before we get started, just a little bit of technical stuff. Make sure that you can hear us and your audio is activated. There is phone dial-in options available if you're having trouble with the connections. All participants will be in listen-only mode for today's session, but we do encourage you to ask questions throughout the session, and we will be taking questions throughout the presentation. Please use the Q&A button to submit your questions, and then we'll address those. And then also note that we're recording today's session, so we can make that available to people who signed up but weren't able to make the live event today. If you can move me on, please. At the Lead Network, all of our events are...
Right, it's not moving on, hang on. There you
go. Yes, so all of our events are conducted under antitrust guidelines. We do have customers, competitors, suppliers, all on these calls. So there is a whole host of topics that we're going to stay very well clear of for today's session. Right, next if we can move on. Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you. I want to say a really warm welcome to those of you who are joining a Lead Network event for the very first time. So let me just take a moment to introduce you to Lead. The Lead Network's mission is to attract, retain, and advance women in the consumer goods and retail sector in Europe. And we do that through education, leadership, and business development. Lead is a non-profit, volunteer-led organization, and our focus is really to drive gender equality within our sector. As I said, we're volunteer-led, and we have over 140 volunteers. We have 35 partners who are supporting us and who are also staffing our volunteer roles. And we now have over 7,000 members across our European network. We offer a range of opportunities, both for personal development, but also for organizations to learn from each other. And today's session is really a focus on a personal development topic. Lou, if we can move on to the next slide. So we really understand that at the moment we're in a completely different and new territory, even though we're about 4 or 5 weeks in now to the new normal. But we understand that it's really difficult time. And so what we've been looking to do at the Lead Network is, while we're unable to, of course, host our face-to-face events, we're trying to really bring to you on a regular basis virtual events and webinars so we can continue to engage as a community. But also we're adjusting some of our topics to really make sure that we are supporting you during this current time. So today's webinar, I'm really, really pleased that we're running with the support of Lou Banks from Rising Vibe. And we'll be really focused on the topic of emotion and how is this whole crisis impacting us individually, and therefore how do we lead our teams through this crisis. We've also got a webinar coming up next week. This has been in the diary for a little bit longer, and it's about growing your pie. So we're going to be looking at performance, image, and exposure. But we're going to really also look at that through the lens of how do we do all that in a virtual context, given that we're not in the office and we might not be operating as we normally would. So if you haven't signed up for that next week, please go ahead and do so. Now, without much further ado at all, it's my great pleasure to introduce to you Lou Banks, founder of Rising Vibe, who will be leading today's session. So I'm handing over to you, Lou.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me again. I didn't expect, I guess, only a couple of months ago to be doing a webinar on this subject. And we have recently published one of our blogs saying how this has hit us with a sledgehammer. And I'm sure most of you listening to this have experienced some kind of sledgehammer feeling from this crisis, which still feels for me extremely surreal, more normal than it did, but still quite surreal. And the reason we're talking about this subject, about putting on a brave face, is that the way to do this? And we have a picture of a heart in a cape as our visual, is because Rising Vibe is all about emotion in business culture, which I'll talk to you about in a bit. And we've always talked about having a brave heart, which is vulnerability, self-disclosure, that kind of thing, which I'm going to talk to you in more detail about. But what I've really noticed in the last month, especially, because I would say for us as a business, this hit us like a sledgehammer, week commencing the 7th or 8th of March, where on March the 12th, actually, we lost all the money in our pipeline. Our forecasting was impacted hugely. We've had to furlough most of the delivery team. We've had to make cost savings. We've had to think about a new strategy. You know, the people that are still in the business, the survivor guilt around that versus the people that have, you know, are no longer in the business. It's been, in my career, the toughest month of being a leader in the whole of my career. And with all the clients that I'm working with, and actually we're doing some work with the NHS, supporting the NHS as well, that the brave face comment has come up time and time again. Got to put on a brave face. I'm leading this thing, I've got to put on a brave face. I don't want to worry the family, I've got to put on a brave face. And actually, Rising Vibe is all about owning your emotion and being honest about how you're really feeling. So the brave face, in our opinion and our experience, can be really unhelpful. So that is what I want to talk to you about today. And as Christina said, I prefer to take questions as we go through. So what I'm going to do is, when it feels relevant to stop after a slide, I'm going to ask Christina if there are any questions in the Q&A. So please, you know, dump any thoughts, challenge, anything you want a little bit more detail about, put it in there, and then we can, we'll talk those questions through as we go through this. So just a little bit about us, for those of you that don't know us. So Rising Vibe, we're culture consultants, and our brother brand, our sub brand, is Calling Out the Men. And we are, what we mean by culture consultants is that we help our clients to define from scratch if they haven't got anything, or refine if they have got something already, whether it's values, a mission statement, a charter, whatever it might be, define or refine the culture that they want, so that it's not just a bunch of values on the wall. You know, it's very clear and explicit around how you expect people to show up and be. And we help them to identify where they're starting from, and then we help to move them from their A to B point. But what's really important to us at Rising Vibe is that emotion, well-being, is at the heart of every single culture. And the brother brand, Calling Out the Men, is specifically targeting emotional support for men in business, because there isn't any out there. And a little kind of litmus test, if you were to Google support for men in business and support for women in business, what you'll find is a big long list of things out there for women. And when you Google support for men in business, what you tend to get is how men need to support women in business. So we're being deliberately, I guess, overt, quite provocative about that, because actually for us, there's not real balance in terms of emotional support. And clearly right now, that is even more important. But what do we mean by culture in context of the work that we do? So way of life of groups of people mean the way they do things. So how do we do things around here? How are we expected to show up and behave collectively? People are the culture. On a regular basis, I hear people say, well, the culture's just not changing, or the culture's still as bad as it was, or it's a toxic culture around here. When actually you are also the culture. We are the culture. If you work in an organization, you are that culture, yet people tend to talk about it in a disassociated way, like it's something separate. So we are really challenging our clients, every single person in the organization, to associate with the culture and accept they are part of it. We work at an individual level, so we work with a coaching approach, and so we target the individual, but on a collective level, there is then impact. And some of the stuff I'm going to talk to you about today will help you see that. And how we define it in the Rising Vibe way is, a culture is clarity, explicit clarity around what's expected and then accepted. because what we find is a lot of the work that is delivered, supported, created around culture change is brilliant, but people aren't held to account around what is accepted. And I'm going to talk a bit about that a bit later, actually, because at times like this, when this is completely unprecedented for everybody, sometimes just day to day, we accept things that are not expected because it's too uncomfortable to hold people to account. And at a time like this, we are noticing that it's slipping even more. And I myself have found it the most challenging time ever for me personally to stay true to that. I've done it, but it's been really painful. So I'm going to use some of my real life experiences in this past month to help bring this to life a bit. So that's what we mean by culture and being culture consultants. So why do we use emotion? So our strapline is, we use emotion to drive cultural change. Well, whether or not we like to admit it, and some people are much more comfortable kind of owning emotions and being an emotional being, which we all are, emotion will drive whether or not we engage or resist something. So if we feel good about something, then we are more likely to want to learn, we're more up for changing, engaging, seeing opportunity, possibility. There is less resistance when we are feeling good about something. When we're not feeling good about something, and we have our rising vibrational scale, which we call high vibe and low vibe emotions, when we're not feeling good about something, we'll be more low vibe, which means there's going to be more resistance, again, on a scale, on a spectrum. If I'm feeling a little bit bored with something, there'll be a little bit of resistance. But if I'm feeling anxious about something, there's going to be much greater resistance. So how we are feeling massively impacts learning and change, which is why we use that as the fundamental way for us to access what's going on for people. We are emotional beings and everyone will resonate. Whether we like to say it out loud or not, we will all feel. Some of us are very good at pushing our feelings away. I, for sure, was one of those people. And as a result of that, suffered with very bad anxiety and panic attacks for a long time that I wasn't talking about because I was not allowing myself to feel what I needed to feel, which is one reason why I'm extremely passionate about this. And most of the clients we work with, this comes up a lot. We like to call them functioning fakeaholics. You know, I'm functioning, I'm doing okay, but actually I'm feeling wretched. That's the classic brave face stuff, really. We're hardwired for connection and experience social pain. So, you know, we are emotional beings who need connection. We need a tribe. We're hardwired that way. If we're not part of a tribe, if we're not connected, we don't feel safe. And at some level, we'll feel under threat. The reptilian brain will kick in and we will feel at some level like we're going to die if we're not part of something. So, you know, we've put here COVID-19 means that low vibe emotions are greater than ever. You know, people are having to self-isolate. People are having to keep distance, socially distance. People are working from home who aren't used to working from home. Christina and I were talking before this, you know, I've always worked from home. Our business is based from home and we go to the client. I'm quite enjoying not having to travel so much, but actually it's now starting to feel quite painful. So, and I'm used to working from home. So those of you out there, or those of you that have teams and people around you that are not used to it, this can be really, really difficult because we're not getting the connection. Even though we can do it like this and Zoom calls and Google Hangouts and that kind of thing, it's not quite the same. And we all experience social pain on a regular basis, and social pain is feelings of isolation, rejection, exclusion, lack of influence, lack of feeling heard, feeling misunderstood. Anything where we feel disconnected, we will experience social pain, and that is being exacerbated big time right now. And for those people that are, I guess, skeptical about social pain and connection and don't really see that it has a place in business, because emotion and business isn't always used in the same sentence, and especially in our experience, the low vibe emotions. So we might talk about stress, we might talk about feeling overwhelmed, but we rarely feel comfortable talking about despair, depression, anxiety, shame in business. But that is going on all the time. And we feel that, generally speaking, when we're not connected in some way. But right now, it is even bigger than ever. And for the skeptics, social pain is experienced in exactly the same way as physical pain. So when we experience any of those things I've just shared, the part of the brain called the anterior cingulate will light up, and it also lights up when we're in physical pain. So if I break my ankle, anterior cingulate will light up. If I feel disconnected and isolated and rejected, the anterior cingulate will light up. And all of our work is based around social pain, experience social pain, low vibe emotions. you know, every single piece of work-related stress, exit interviews, absenteeism, presenteeism, leaveism, all of those, when you get underneath it, are around social pain. And now that's been magnified. So it's always relevant in the work that we do. But right now, with the current situation, the current crisis, it's even more pertinent and important that we address this and enable environments and cultures where people are able to talk about how they're really feeling, which is what we're about anyway, but right now it needs to be more than ever. So before I move into the main, I'm just checking, is there anything, Christina, anything I need to pick up in terms of comments or so far?
No questions so far.
Perfect. So why the brave face? Now, I'm just going to move us out of the way because we were here over the bullet points. When we put on a brave face, we are masking how we really feel about the situation. And sometimes, just jump into the last bullet for a minute, sometimes a brave face can serve us well. So, for example, if I'm coming onto this webinar now, if I've perhaps had a morning that has felt very difficult, maybe I've been trying to do some homeschooling with my 11-year-old, which is true, and I've had a difficult time and I'm feeling a little bit despairing, a little bit anxious, a little bit irritated, a little bit angry, whatever it might be, feeling worried about her education, actually coming onto this and saying, right, I just need to park that and show up and pretend right now that I'm actually in a good space for an hour. Doing that here, that's not actually too much of a problem. If I'm about to go and do a presentation or speak at a conference, and maybe I've got some stuff going on at home that's not feeling great, to put on a brave face and step up and act as if and go on and do my thing for that period of time is not unhelpful. Sustaining that during different situations, I mean, COVID is one of them, maybe struggling with someone you're working with, maybe feeling unable to do the job that you're supposed to do because you are lacking confidence or you don't know exactly what it is that's expected of you. Putting on a brave face during those sustained, more chronic situations is really unhelpful. It is extremely exhausting and it is social pain. So the anterior cingulate will be lighting up consistently. And any of you that have ever experienced chronic physical pain will know how exhausting that is. Even if it's something as simple as, you know, you pulled a muscle and for a week, you just, every time you move, you're like, oh, it's uncomfortable, or that's really tiring. And that, you know, that's something that's not that significant in terms of physical pain. Chronic social pain is really tiring. So if you are not allowing yourself to really feel it and pretending you're okay when you're not, that again is extra effort. So actually it's going to make you unwell. The words mean nothing unless the eyes speak them too. All of you at some point, I'm sure, would have experienced meeting someone in your life, working with someone where you just feel something is missing, or there's a lack of congruence, or you just can't connect, you just can't read them. Chances are at some level, if we allow ourselves to, you know, really tap into our intuition and feel energetically what's going on, and for that, for some people, the energetic thing is a bit too woo and a bit too much, but whether or not you buy into the concept that we are all energy, you would all have experienced the buzz in a room, feeling flat, feeling excited in your tummy, that kind of thing. We can feel what is going on in ourselves and we can sense it in others. So when someone else is not showing up and being real, authenticity is used a lot. I tend not to use it too much, the words, I think it's a bit overused, but you know, someone who's being themselves, truly being themselves, that is a very different experience than being around someone who's not. And I know that my mum always used to say to me things like, you're smiling but your eyes aren't. That's what I mean by this. There is something disconnecting, feels unsafe when you're around someone who is putting on a brave face. And the intention is really positive, really positive. Someone is putting on a brave face usually because they want to help. They don't want to worry other people. They don't want to let down their team. They feel like they've got no choice. They've got to get through. They're worried about what people will think of them if they show that they're really struggling, that they're worried. The intention behind a brave face is rarely negative, but the impact often is not positive. On others, because it breaks down real connection, and for yourself, it can make you ill. Social pain, when sustained, can make us ill. And it's absolutely exhausting. And right now, when we do get to a place where we have the opportunity to recover from this, recover into whatever the world is going to look like going forwards, if we have not allowed ourselves to truly feel what we're feeling, it's going to limit our recovery. It might even prevent it. We could get stuck in a place of brave face, which means we're not able to move on, because it just becomes our familiar discomfort to stay in that place. And the longer we stay somewhere, the harder it is to move forward from it. And I can speak from experience with that. Because of my anxiety, I did not talk about it. And the only time I started talking about it was when my panic attacks at night were so bad, I was slightly afraid to go to bed. I couldn't get rid of it until I owned it. So you can't get away with it. Some people get away with it for a long time, but it doesn't help. It doesn't help you, it doesn't help others, it doesn't help connection. And as a leader, you know, the connection piece is so powerful and so important, as you know. If we want our people to be the best they can be, to feel safe, feel able to ask for help, be open to challenge, we need to have that connection. You can't move A to B unless you know both A and B points. So a bit like when working with clients around culture, if the B point is recovery and feeling better, feeling well, feeling motivated, whatever it might be, if we're not being honest about where we're starting from, if we're pretending, for example, that we're just a little bit stressed, when in reality we're in deep-rooted despair, we're not going to get the support to move us from A to B, because we're not actually starting from the right place. The metaphor I like to use is, if I was driving, I live in Southampton, down the south coast of England, and London is only an hour and a half away from me. Let's say I was driving to Scotland, and I went via London and I got lost in London, and I was a little bit of a state, and I rang someone in my team and I said, I've got lost, I'm heading to Glasgow, but I'm stuck in Liverpool because I'm so stressed, I've forgotten where I am. I know it begins with L, but I've forgotten where I am. So I get directions to take me from Liverpool to Glasgow, where in reality I'm in London. So I need directions from London to Glasgow. I need to take the journey from an A point London to Glasgow, my B point. But I'm getting directions from Liverpool to Glasgow. That is happening when people are putting on a brave face. No, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine. I just need a little bit more time, or I just need a little bit of help, or I just need a bit more resource, or I just need, where in reality, we need something very different, but we're not owning it. The brave face can really barrier that. And I've already given an example of the short-term brave face can absolutely help. It's when we sustain it and continue to pretend for too long that we're okay when we're not really, that we can become really, really stuck. Right. What I'm going to do actually, Christina, as I move through, you can just, because clearly I'm struggling to navigate our faces around the screen. Oh, actually, this is one of my favorite quotes here. Never in the history of calming down has anyone calmed down by being told to calm down. When we're not feeling great, and someone says, you know, just look on the bright side, or just calm down, or, you know, look for the positives, it's actually really unhelpful. But if we're not being honest about how we're really feeling, we might get some of that stuff because people think we're not feeling as bad as we are. And it's just, so we're not being kind to ourselves, and we're not helping others support us. So the brave face of leadership. So what there's loads of quotes out there. We all know, we all have a quote. And what I did was look at some of them that have, and they're great quotes and they're very powerful, but in our opinion, have really supported leaders to believe that they have to have a brave face. They have to be strong. They have to cope. They can't be vulnerable. They can't look to be struggling. The true test of leadership is how well you function in the crisis. Now, that in itself feels like a huge challenge. And I have never second guessed myself so much as I have in this last month. I don't think I've functioned particularly well in this crisis. Would I say that I've been at my best? I don't think so. I have done my best. My question that I've asked myself regularly throughout this is, am I acting with integrity? Am I doing the best I can do right now based on what I know? As long as I can answer yes to both of those, I have been able to manage myself on this. However, do I think I've functioned well in this? No, I don't. So if I took that to, as fact, then right now I'd be beating myself up a lot. So these other ones here, so this one here about leaders don't have light shoulders, there are always heavy burdens to bear. Absolutely. But what that suggests is we have to take all the heavy burdens. Now, as a leader, we are relied on to set direction, to make decisions, to hold people to account, all of that stuff that sometimes in tough times, and again, this is unprecedented, can feel really difficult. But that doesn't mean the burden has to be taken just by the leadership. And what I'm getting at the moment from people I'm talking to, I haven't felt like that, by the way. I've felt very supported by most of the team. But there's a lot of people that I'm working with that absolutely feel that now. And they're feeling this true test of leadership, self-beration. So not feeling great anyway, and then self-berating, haven't done a great enough job. Have I got it right? Am I getting it wrong? I don't know how to be. Not many people know how to be right now, and that's okay. Leaders think and talk about solutions. Followers think and talk about the problems. Now, this would suggest that actually, as a leader, you're not allowed to talk about the problems. In my experience, solutions come when we recognize there is a problem to be solved. People don't engage in doing something different, or learning something new, changing, if they don't believe there's a problem that needs to be solved. So actually, engaging in the problem first can be really helpful. But again, and I am also working with leaders, by the way, that would challenge this in the way that we're challenging it. But I'm feeling a lot of real low vibe, some anxiety from some leaders around this stuff, that actually I can't say I'm finding this a problem. I have to have all the answers. Nobody right now has got the answers. As I said, we're supporting the NHS right now. They're in the same situation. People want answers, they haven't got them. Be strong. You never know who you are inspiring. Actually, in my experience, and based on the Rising Vibe way and the Rising Vibe ethos, sometimes owning and acknowledging and being honest about the fact that right now you don't know, you're just doing the best that you can with as much integrity as you can find, is also inspiring. I find that really inspiring. But again, there's this pressure about strength. And I love this Jesse Jackson quote, which is why I put it in here. But we've highlighted this bit in orange. So leaders must be tough enough to fight. I agree with that. You shouldn't have to be fighting all the time, and you shouldn't have to fight alone. But yeah, some toughness is key. Tender enough to cry. Now that will repel some people, repulse some people. But that bit for me is about, we are going to struggle. People struggle. Leaders are human too. So that is key. Human enough to make mistakes, absolutely. And what I'm also noticing, and I noticed this in myself hugely, for the first time in my career, really, the discomfort that I've been feeling around, did I cock that up? Did I get that wrong? The self-doubt has been huge. And actually really resisting wanting to own the fact I might have got it wrong, because this kind of work, supporting people, and when it comes to emotions, is what we do for a living. So the pressure I felt to get it right has been overwhelming. Humble enough to admit them, absolutely key. Strong enough to absorb the pain. Now, absorb the pain, again, I just think this is another example of leaders don't have to absorb pain of others. I hear a lot of leaders say, I have to motivate my team. I have to inspire my team. I have to drive my team. Actually, as leaders, we are responsible for supporting the people that work with us, that work for us, to motivate themselves, help them motivate themselves, help them feel inspired themselves, help them drive themselves. And what I know to be true, and I'd love to know what you guys think, is that I have felt the most motivated when I'm working with and for people who are motivated. I feel the most inspired when I'm working with and for people who are inspired. I feel the most driven and passionate to get things done, to make things happen, when I'm surrounded by people who are motivated and passionate and driven to get things done and make a difference. So what we talk about Rising Vibe is, it has to start with you. It has to start with you. So look after yourself first, and then your team comes second. That doesn't mean you don't care, but if you are not in a good space yourself, if you are not looking after yourself with some self-care, you're not going to be any good to anybody. And I love a metaphor. Any of those that have met me before will know I love a metaphor. And I try and use client metaphors or metaphors from clients that we work with. So British Airways, for example, you know, most of us have done a lot of flying in our lives. Secure your own oxygen mask first. Absolutely. You are not any good to anybody if you haven't got your own oxygen mask secured first. The RNLI, you know, that save people at sea, save lives at sea. The directive to the coxswains who drive the boats is you save yourself first, then you save the team, then you save the boat, then you save the casualty. So when you think about those kind of things, that is so important in terms of leadership. But the brave face, pretending we're okay when we're not, is not going to help us do that. We're not going to look after ourselves first, and then we're not going to be of any use to anybody. And our point here about where's your focus of attention. If you are focusing your attention on, for example, I have to be strong, I have to cope, I have to have all the answers, I have to be strong for everybody else, I have to motivate my team, the pressure that comes with that in this time of uncertainty is going to be so extreme, where if your focus of attention is maybe on how do I look after myself so I can look after other people better, what do I need so that I can ask for help, what do I need so that I'm okay with not knowing, that as a focus of attention is going to serve you much, much better than a focus of attention of having to be there for everybody else and be brave and be strong. So I think there's a couple of questions, Christine.
Yes, there is. So there is a comment from Julie, and she said one of the early lessons of leadership that she has was to show vulnerability and care, and that it was really scary at first, but it has served her really well.
Yeah.
And then she goes on to say, so in the recent crisis, that we're actually seeing many female leaders show this care and transparency in, for example, leaders of Finland or New Zealand or Germany, just to name a few. And I think there's been quite a bit in the press at the moment. What do you think we can learn from these female ladies, or female leaders?
So I have the one thing I talk about a lot is go first. Someone's got to go first. And when it comes to hierarchy and leadership, when I say I don't do hierarchy, what I mean by that is that we work with a human being. We work with the person. What your role is irrelevant. We all feel, we all experience these things. But when it comes to vulnerability, self-disclosure, being honest, being open, I always talk about going first. And I guess what these women have done, and this does highlight that women, generally speaking, and by the way, I have met men and worked with many men who have found it easier to be vulnerable than some women I've worked with. So I'm not blanket approaching this, but generally speaking, women will be more comfortable going first with this kind of thing. And in this time, it is so important that vulnerability around not knowing and being afraid is shown. And I think what they can teach the wider world is actually all these women have had, because I've seen, lots of stuff on social media, which is just talking about how amazing they are. So if this doesn't reinforce the message that we and other organizations that do similar work to us are talking about, which is going first and being vulnerable, showing emotion, showing care, is so key, and no one is going to do anything but admire you for it, then I don't know when we can learn that, really.
Thank you.
Okay, so, right, why Braveheart instead? So this is our definition of a brave heart, and I think actually Julie's comment will back this. It is very similar to what Julie's just said. So being honest about how you feel. So being honest about your fears, feeling able to ask for help. So this is a real life example where when I had to, first of all, lay off the delivery team, then we went to redundancy, then we went back to furlough because the rules are changing all the time, and I would not want to be in the government right now. I mean, generally speaking, I don't think I would want to be in the UK government, but right now, especially not. So they're doing the best job they can do, and I think they're doing a great job considering the situation. But things kept changing. So 1 minute redundancy was more effective for the business than furlough, and then the chip rules changed, and some of the responses that came from some of the team, bearing in mind what we do for a living in terms of being honest, there's no right, wrong, good, bad in terms of emotion. You just got to be honest about how you're feeling. Some of that didn't happen. And it was really difficult. Psychological safety was massively impacted. And as much as I knew this was about the situation and the crisis and the extreme emotional charge for everybody, I really struggled. And what I could have done is said, oh no, it's fine, it's a difficult time, I need to be brave face and pretend it's not bothering me. I didn't. I talked about how hurtful I found it. I talked about how scared I was that I was getting it wrong based on the fact that we do this for a living. And I absolutely reached out for help from some of the other team around how am I managing this? I needed reassurance like I've never needed it before. And it was really uncomfortable. But that's what we mean about the brave heart, being open about your struggles and not knowing. My self-doubt, we all self-doubt. You know, I self-doubt on a regular basis. But interestingly, I probably self-doubt more regularly about outside of work. You know, being a mum, am I being there enough for the kids? Am I being a good enough daughter? You know, am I really being present enough as a wife? All of those things will usually drive self-doubt more than business for me. So I have definitely felt self-doubt in business, but probably not for a long time, not in this field. And it was awful. I couldn't sleep. I was churned up, not in my stomach, feeling nauseous, but I was really open about it. It didn't go away, but it definitely took the edge off of it. So that's what we mean about a brave heart. I'm going to talk to you in a minute around, there's a difference between feeling sorry for yourself versus being honest. Because right now, no one is immune to the impact of COVID, right? It doesn't matter how old you are, how much money you have, where you live in the world, how successful or not you are, how long you've been in business. Actually, this is so different for everybody, and leaders are experiencing the same challenges as their team. And I put plus some there, not in a meaning that other people aren't feeling the pain, but the pressure that I've just talked around, that is layering on top for so many of the clients that I'm talking to. They're feeling the same pain. They're also worried about getting sick. They're also worried about people they love and care about getting sick. They're worried about the business, whether it's their business, whether they are in charge of the business. They're worried about having to lay people off, people losing their jobs. They're taking it extremely personally. They're feeling guilt and shame around doing that. They're feeling the fear of money, you know, revenue, minimizing costs. They're feeling the same pain that a lot of non-leadership roles are feeling, but then they've got the extra pressure of, and I've got to be able to do it all. So this is what we mean by brave heart in business. And I'm sure everybody on this call at some point has heard of the drama triangle. You know, it's a very, very old model from transaction analysis. I love it. What we mean by a brave heart in business is acknowledgement and ownership without being a victim, persecutor, or rescuer. So the situation I talked to you about, where there were some reactions, responses to what we had to do in the business to make sure we survived this thing, were not comfortable for me and were not helpful. And I understood why. I could get why that was. But when I was honest about how I felt, I did it from a place of being very neutral. There were times when it didn't feel neutral. There were times when I absolutely felt sorry for myself and victim. There were times when I was saying to myself, you know, I'm also having to go through this. I'm also having to feel the pain. I'm also experiencing money challenges, and now I'm being blamed. Now you're blaming me for yours. Very sorry for myself. There were times when I felt like that. There were times when I felt very persecuting. So, you know, blaming their behavior, being very uncomfortable about it. And I did at times feel a little bit like, should I or should I not rescue them? So should I call it out or not? Everyone's having a tough time. I shouldn't say anything. I did find myself in those places because I'm human. We will all find ourselves in those places. What we mean by a brave heart in business is when you are having the conversations, acknowledging and owning how you're feeling without being in there, or acknowledging you're in there, which is very different. So I know at one point I did say, with one conversation when someone had kind of completely withdrawn and refused to engage and said, well, I've never lost my job before. And I said, I've never had to lay off half my team before. Now, in that moment, I recognized I was a bit of a victim, and I owned it and said, and I recognized that that's not your problem, but I'm also feeling the pain. I just need to share that with you because I'm finding this interaction really difficult. So you can still own and acknowledge it once you're in there, when you're in there. But there's the point is that you recognize you're in there. You are not saying, oh, it's awful, it's not fair, they're not being kind to me. That is being in the triangle. That is being in victim. It's their fault, they're rude, they should be behaving like this, we're all in this together. That's very persecuting. I'm not going to say anything because I don't want to upset them, very rescuing. We all do it. It's about knowing you're doing that and owning that, or doing what you can to step out of that so you can engage without being in any of those places. I think there's a question actually, is there? So I'll take that before I...
Paul's actually sharing with us. So as part of his leadership team, he recently felt very overwhelmed in a virtual meeting by the whole enormity of the circumstances that we're facing. And he showed it with real emotion. And because he felt uncomfortable, he actually switched off his camera, but carried on talking. And it ended up resulting in what he describes as the most real meeting they had in the last month, because it enabled other people to start sharing in. And he says, as a man in leadership amongst all female colleagues, he felt very supported, but was concerned that that sort of emotion may have been received very differently if the team had been all male. Are you seeing a change much more during this period for men in leadership or with male leaders versus women?
Well, I don't know if we are actually. I guess what I'm noticing is that the male leaders are struggling more to, I'm not sure anything's changed yet. And my view is, and I really hope this, we're seeing a lot more humanized leadership now. You know, people are having to work remotely with dogs barking, children on their lap, being interrupted. You know, the whole, you're not professional unless you're suited and booted, and that's being broken down, which is great. The other bit that's happening is a lot of leaders are being forced to have conversations around how people are feeling. And I'm noticing there's a lot of male clients we have who are really struggling with that because they've not had to do it before. They've certainly not had to do it remotely, and they're not feeling equipped to do it. So there's now a lot more of people having to do things, having to have conversations about stuff they've not had to do before, who need the support. So I think there will be a change. I think it's still too early. I still think we're, you know, for those of us that have been, you know, self-isolating and social distancing, it's felt quite long already. I think we've got more of that ahead of us. So I don't think we're out of this bit yet. But I think if we can make sure that we really support and equip people now to do the stuff that they are having to do, they've not had to do before, I think going forwards, we'll see a completely different environment where Paul can show up, you know, amongst a group of men and go first with that and feel much more comfortable about it. That's what I hope anyway. That's what I hope.
Yeah, and thank you, Paul, for actually sharing that example with us. I think it's great to hear.
Yeah, and basically Paul's just talking about going first, right?
Yeah,
he's just gone first.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's amazing.
And I think to his point, or what you also mentioned just now, I think talking about emotion is difficult enough, but actually doing it in a virtual context as well, rather than sitting in a room together, I think takes it to another level, right? And I think that's the other bit we have to acknowledge, that normally you'd reserve some of these more difficult or personal conversations actually for a face-to-face interaction. Yeah. And we haven't got that option.
No, but what's interesting, there's a few people I'm working with actually who have found it easier because you can disassociate a little bit. You know, that it doesn't feel quite so intense for some people. For me, I find it more difficult because I'd much rather be with someone. But I think for some people, it's giving them an opportunity to dip their toe in a slightly more disassociated way, which is a great way in, you know, great first step, actually, for some people. The piece here about caring about your people and still holding them to account. One of my my oldest, not in age, oldest friends is a pediatric nurse specialist. And one of the things she talked to me about years ago was, we were talking about boundaries around children. And I use a lot of metaphor in business. You know, business boundaries are really key. You know, we talked at the beginning about what's expected and what's accepted. The expected versus accepted. If we accept something different, then there's no point actually putting anything in place. But holding people to account and boundaries is very challenging for people because of social pain and the fear of breaking a relationship and making it worse, etc. She talked to me about how many children who have had cancer, you know, at the very young age, it is quite common for them to experience behavioural challenges when they get a little bit older, because quite understandably, some of the boundaries are not upheld. So let them have more sweets because they've been ill. It doesn't matter if they go to bed late because they've been ill. I know they've been a little bit rude, but let's let it go because they're unwell. And I remember her talking to me about this a long time ago. when my son, who's 19, was little. And she said, you know what, the time when we let boundaries drop actually is often the time we really need them to be in place. And we had a friend at the time who was going through a divorce, and because the children were, you know, impacted, of course, again, boundaries slipped. Boundaries keep us safe, actually. And so the brave heart in business here, and this has been the most painful thing for me that I did completely second guess myself around, was absolutely I cared, and I care about what had to happen and how it impacted the people in terms of having to lay people off. It was soul destroying for me, you know, epitomized social pain. And some of the behavior was not helpful. And if being in the business, that behavior had shown up, I would have challenged it. And I still did during this phase, even though it's a crisis, it's unprecedented, you know, people are emotionally charged. I was completely aware of that and had loads of compassion for that, which is the caring about, but I still held them to account. That is what we talk about in terms of brave heart in business. That's what we mean generally. And at this time, what I'm noticing is a lot of people saying, well, you know, I'm just not going to say anything because of COVID. I'm just not going to say anything because they're working from home. Actually, this is the time we need to do it more than ever. But it feels so painful. And that has been the most painful thing for me, for sure. So maintaining boundaries and staying true to organizational values. So Rising Vibe is about owning your emotions, being honest about it, saying what you mean to the person you need to say it to. That is what we talk about as part of our business. So when that wasn't happening in the business, even though I understood why, I needed to call it out and have a conversation about it, which I did, which was extremely uncomfortable for me and gave me some sleepless nights. But I guess my brave heart, that has felt like the bravest thing I've ever had to do so far. But it's reinforced how critical it was, because now I feel like things are starting to flatten out and feel a little bit easier again. Whereas if I hadn't, I absolutely know I would have felt some resentment. But I chose the discomfort, and it was extreme, of having that conversation rather than the resentment of leaving it and never really being able to let go of it. And I always talk here about a momentary collapse is more helpful than a brave face. That doesn't mean that if you don't get all this right, if you do step into victim, you know, or persecutor or rescuer, if you actually don't hold them to account, if you let your boundaries and organizational values slip and you kind of lose it for a bit, that is human, and that's recoverable. Just putting on a brave face when actually you feel like collapsing is really unhelpful. And I guess this quote here is exactly what we're talking about, you know, and has really reinforced for me the work that we do, which is, you know, a leader takes people where they want to go. A great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but ought to be. But that has been extremely hard to do at times like this. I think, is there a question?
There's a question from Luke. He said, we've all had managers or colleagues that overshare, and it's difficult to find the line between sharing, you know, transparency and openness versus people just offloading. How do you walk that line? How do you think feedback plays a part here?
Okay, so my definition of overshare versus vulnerability is content, actually. This is how I have, I'd love to know what Luke thinks about this. This is how I've kind of made the difference in my head. So let's use an example. And actually, this is a real life example. Quite a long time ago, someone I work with who, a brilliant coach, but would very much overshare in terms of using their examples. I love stories. Storytelling, metaphors, analogies are brilliant to bring that into life. But actually talking about a relationship breakdown and stepchildren issues, going into content about what had happened, that for me was oversharing and was very uncomfortable for people, versus talking about an experience, and you could even say relationship breakdown, but talking about the emotion associated with that and how you manage that, didn't manage it well, is completely different for me than going into loads of content and using your audience or someone else as someone to offload onto. That for me, it is a fine line. That is how I differentiate, because I always talk to people, you know, that work with us and say, we're going to ask you to be really honest about where you're at. You don't have to share any content. So you could say something as simple as, I'm really uncomfortable with that. I'm not comfortable talking about this kind of thing because I've had an experience of doing that in the past and it didn't end well for me. That for me is vulnerability and self-disclosure. Going into, let me tell you what happened last year when I did that. This happened, that happened, he said, she said, and it was awful when that for me is the oversharing versus disclosure vulnerability. So I don't know what Luke thinks of that, because you're right, there is a big difference, but it's a really fine line.
Thank you. Thanks. And then we have another question from Claudia. She says, as part of the situation at the moment, she's put in regular virtual team huddles to help the team connect and share how they are, see what they need, and really just stay connected. And she says it generally works, but she finds that some people are very quiet. And when they do talk, everything's fine. And she's not quite sure on how to deal with it. So is she, misusing their time with a team huddle when it's actually not needed, or are they putting on a brave face? And so she's wondering, does she need to find a different way to help people? Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I think the fact that the regular check-ins are happening is so important, first of all. What I've noticed a lot of actually is, I'm making sure I'm as accessible as normal. I'm checking in with people. What I've noticed, because our basic survival needs are under threat right now, people are genuinely in some places going, I don't know if I'm going to have any money to pay my mortgage, to buy food for my family. That has right now trumped the social connection for some people. But in hindsight, that always being there, reaching out, regular check-ins will be remembered for sure. So there's something for me about, if some of this stuff doesn't feel like it's being received in a way that is intended, chances are it's because people's heads are somewhere else, but still keep doing it, still keep showing up. Those people that maybe are just fine, if I was Claudia, then I would just call it out, and I would say separately offline, give them a call. I just want to check in. You've been quiet on the calls. You're saying you're fine. And that might be because actually you are fine, which is great. I just want to make sure that you are. And if you're not, and you don't want to talk to me about it, that's also fine. I just want you to know that I'm here if you need anything. That would be what I would do. And I think what we tend to do, which is very obvious, right? But what we tend to do is shy away from it. We don't want to do that because we want to impose. We don't want to. If you've got anything in your gut saying to you, I'm not sure they are fine, just check in. You can't make them tell you if they're not fine. But if you keep showing up and saying that, if they're not, when you've done that one-to-one check-in, chances are they're more likely to. And if they don't, there's nothing you can do about it. But I guess hand on heart, you can say, I am doing everything I can to help them access how they're really feeling with me if they choose to, but you can't make them.
Great, thank you. That's all the questions for right now.
Okay, so I guess as in summary, we are hardwired for connection, and we all experience social pain, as I talked about at the beginning. Nobody is immune from social pain. And actually, we even feel social pain before social pain happens. So for example, that's why a lot of people have fear of public speaking, because their fear of being judged kicks in before they're even actually speaking. So social pain is everywhere. So I guess the key thing here is we are hardwired for connection. Connection is being broken at the moment because we can't be with people. It's absolutely okay to be struggling with not knowing right now. It always is, by the way, but right now we all have permission for that. Doesn't matter if you're a leader or not. Words mean nothing unless the eyes speak them too. I think the key thing here is just remember, to stay truly connected, you have to be real. And so go back to, is it Claudia? Sorry if I've got I think it was one of those. If you are self-disclosing and you are showing up being real, the chances of someone being honest with you back are far greater than us showing up with a brave face and asking someone if they're okay, because we're not likely to get that back if we're not showing up in the same way. We're likely to get the mirror back. All of these words, the Jesse Jackson quote, which I love: tough, tender, human, humble, strong, resilient. The tender, humble, and human are as important as the others. We don't have to be all this strong stuff all the time. Leaders are experiencing the same challenges as their team plus some. So leaders are human too. Making mistakes is going to happen. I've made loads, by the way. I may not have made as many as I think I have, but my framing, my focus of attention, I talked about where you're focusing your attention. I'm focusing on the moment, which has really helped me on what I'm learning, what I would do differently next time, what in hindsight would I change, if anything. And my focus has always been, if I make a mistake, then I'll learn from it. And right now, am I doing the best I can do with integrity based on what I know? That's kind of kept me going. Acknowledgement and ownership without being a victim, persecutor, rescuer. So everything starts with self. So notice what's going on with you first, because we really can't support someone until we are looking after ourselves. And the momentary collapse is more helpful than a brave face. I would love that we can make this humanized leadership, though it's happening in pockets, the longer this goes on, I think it will become, more spread, I hope. If we can make this a new normal, that's one thing we can take from this. I think it's going to be amazing, actually. So, any questions? I think I'm almost bang to time. That's unusual for me.
Well, we have one more question from Paul. So he's got a team member who's always saying fine, or how fine they are, and actually this is all working well for them. The team member is doing it in the context of team meetings, and whilst he thinks it is important to hear all views and feelings, he's concerned it's inhibiting others in the team from being honest about their situation, where they might be struggling. So I guess it's leading the other way, from what you were just saying. Have you got any thoughts about this and how to best challenge or not challenge in the context of the team?
So again, I guess it depends how brave your heart feels in the moment. But a great example of this, back in January, I was with a client in Amsterdam, and they were going through a big restructure. I mean, this hadn't even hit then. Big restructure, people feeling very vulnerable. I knew this because I'd spoken to some of them individually. We use the scale, and just so you know, you can download the Rising Vibrational Scale from our website. The details are there. You can download it. It's a great way to start having conversations with people about emotion. So if you want to give that a go, please download it from there. And we use the scale. And it was really interesting. A couple of people started talking about where they were on the scale. So frustration, impatience, and irritation is quite high on the low vibe. So it's not that low vibe. Some people started with irritation. Then apparently everybody was irritated. Everybody was irritated. That is not what I was feeling at all. So I called it. And I said, I don't think any of you are lying to me. I think that people are not feeling safe enough to say what's really going on. What I get, based on some of the language some of you have used, is not irritation. It feels way low down for me. And I could be wrong, but I just need to put it out there, because if I don't put it out there, we're not actually going to get what we need to get to. And a great guy called Jason said, okay, really interesting language. This is probably career limiting for me, but I'm going to tell you, I'm deep rooted in anxiety right now. And then guess what? Yeah, actually, you're right. Me too. I'm not feeling. So I would call it out and say, I could be wrong, but what I know is where something starts, and it also depends on the power that person has. And what I mean by that is not necessarily hierarchy, but there's a power structure. Sometimes it's not the hierarchy. There can be someone who has got a presence, has got a power in the room over energy, and you can lead it. So if you've got someone like that not being honest, it can really take the room in a direction that actually isn't real. So I would call it out every time and just say, I could be wrong. This is what I'm experiencing.
And sometimes it could even be facilitating the conversation, actually starting with somebody else in the room and making that person go last.
Yeah.
Right. So they're potentially not setting the tone for everybody else in the moment.
Sometimes energetically, they're still setting the tone. Sometimes you can still feel it, even if they're not speaking.
Great. Well, Lou, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for your questions. I think it's really great and to see people sharing and bringing some of these real situations to life at the moment as well. Because I agree. I think this is happening all over. I think we're all trying to figure this out. Lou, if you can just, I think there is one more slide.
Nope, that's it. I'm on the questions one.
No, for me, if you could.
Oh, for you, sorry. I'm clearly not a very good assistant at that stuff.
No worries at all. What I do want to do is I want to invite all of you, if you're members of the Lead Network, you're able to join our Lead Network member platform, either on the computer or even download the app. It's effectively where our members connect, where you can join the dialogue in. We're going to try and continue this conversation in the member platform. We'll have Lou join in as well. So if you've got additional questions you didn't ask today or we didn't get around to, feel free to engage in there and keep the conversation going, because I think we can all benefit from it. We can all learn from it. So we'd love to see you there.
Absolutely. Yeah. We're all in this together, right? None of us really know what we're doing, but if we can just be honest about that, I think we're going to be fine.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Lou.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you everybody for joining us today. Stay safe and keep those positive vibes going. Thanks everybody.